Welcome to Podcast 83, a regular look at the news, stories, and trends related to Michigan's 83 counties from the Michigan Association of Counties.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Podcast 83, the podcast put on by the Michigan Association of Counties. My name is Steve Currie, the Executive Director of MAC, joined today by the one and only Deena Bosworth. Deena, hope you had a good Easter weekend.
I did. Thank you. A lot of fun.
A little family time, relaxing.
Family time, a little yard work, a lot of cooking.
Weather was pretty good.
Weather was great.
Yeah, good. Well, good. Let's get started then this week. Let's talk about the Public Safety Trust Fund, something we've talked about a few different podcasts. Where's that bill stand now?
Yeah, so thanks, Steve. There were two bills introduced this legislative session on the Public Safety and Violence Prevention Fund. That's House Bills 4260 and 4261. In a great turn of events, these policy bills actually included counties in them, where in previous versions they really did not. In the governor's policy version, in her budget recommendations, she did not include counties as eligible entities for these funds. There is the opportunity of pass-through, but fortunately for us, 4260 and 4261, introduced by Representative Farhat and Representative Harris, do include money for counties. So they take about $103 million out of the state sales tax revenue and distribute that out. So $1.5 million for the Crime Victims' Rights Fund, $1.5 million for grants that'll be put out by, I want to say DHHS, maybe state police, for local units of government that apply for it. But the majority of the funds are going to city, village, and township police departments based on their level of crime. There is a provision in there that you have to reduce your crime by at least 5% to continue to get funding. If not, your funding levels get dropped. So you have to actually make this money work. For counties, though, the substitute bills that were taken up in committee last week have about $28 million available just for county sheriff's departments. And they can apply for those funds and they'll be awarded based on the size of their police force. And then they can use that for, any of the programs they run through the county sheriff's office. The bills did pass out of committee. Now they've advanced to the House floor. We know that it is a priority of the House, of the Senate, and of the governor's office to get this done. So I anticipate some movement on this before the end of the year.
Right. So, and are they still sitting on the floor? Did they get voted out of the House last Thursday?
Nope.
Okay.
They're on the House floor. But now you're making me question it. I know they came out of committee. I don't think they passed on the House floor.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. They were at the end of the session on Thursday. I was watching it, and they were taking some time to do some things. So I wasn't sure if that was one of the things they were working on or not. They
Nope.
were debating.
Still on the House floor.
Okay, so probably see movement on that this week. So along those same lines of funding and areas that we're interested in, let's talk a little bit about the roads package that has now moved over to the Senate, right? And where are we at with that House roads package now?
That was an interesting committee hearing last week. So the Senate Appropriations Committee took up the House Republican road funding plan. And just to remind our members, that plan is over $3 billion, the majority of it allocated to county and local roads. They claim it doesn't really raise any additional new revenue, but they testified in support of their bills on the importance of getting money to local roads across the state, and described how they were going to pay for it. Great testimony, good questions by the Senate Appropriations members. In addition to the House Republican testimony on their road plan, we also heard from the Citizens Research Council on a new policy paper that they issued where they said, I don't know if we necessarily need any more money. We just need to reallocate the funds and spend them better. And they called for rewriting Public Act 51, which I was really quite surprised about.
Yeah, that can get really complicated if you start looking at rewriting PA 51 while you're trying to increase funding for roads at the same time, right?
Exactly. And, for many, many, many years, my entire career, there have been talk about rewriting Public Act 51 and the problems that, many people have with it. Some people want more money for public transit. Some people want more money on the urban roads, and others want more money and more stable funds for the northern and more out county roads. And nobody's going to come to an agreement on it. Nobody's really been able to rewrite this formula. There have been amendments to the act over the years, but not really rewriting this formula. And my fear is that if you try to tackle rewriting that formula at the same time you're trying to do a road funding package, everything is going to stall out. They're just not going to come to an agreement. So that's my concern.
Yeah, two very
Um,
big, two really big issues to tackle at the same time. So why would the Senate take testimony on a House Republican plan when the Democrats control the Senate?
I think they wanted to poke holes in it.
Okay.
Frankly. I really do. I think that, they're focused on getting together their own plan with the governor's office on how they want to tackle the road issue. Um, and the House Republicans clearly acted first and sent out something that, local governments are really, in favor of because it is heavily focused on local roads. But the third component of that hearing this week, Steve, was the Senate Fiscal Agency, where they, poked some financial holes in the House Republican plan, in which they're saying, what is that going to do to the general fund? If you're going to take all of this money from the state's general fund and put it into roads, how does that add up? I mean, that's, the size of the Department of Corrections budget. So, I mean, there was a lot of back and forth of really, does this math work or does this math not work?
Yeah.
And Mac, I mean, we were afraid of this. When we testified in support of the road funding plan, there was that caveat of it just depends on what this does to the state's general fund and how that may impact some of the other line items that counties are dependent on for their services.
Yeah, so we're still a long ways to go before we get to any road funding package, it sounds like. Plus, you got a budget you're still working on too. And while not directly tied to the budget, still like you're appropriating general fund dollars to roads outside the budget. So it's going to impact the budget discussion in some way, shape, or form. It has to.
Yep,
Yeah.
it has to.
Okay. Well, we'll see how things play out here over the next few weeks, probably months, until we get some sort of plan on that. Let's switch gears a little bit to an issue we dealt with a lot at I think it was the end of 2023, wasn't it? That had to do with the renewable energy siting, specifically renewable energy standards. I think there's actually a Supreme Court lawsuit going on right now that we filed an amicus on, to kind of maintain local control in that situation. So what's been introduced in regards to solar siting or renewable energy siting, we'll call it.
Yeah. So Representative Greg Alexander introduced two bills, 4027 and 4028, and those bills are up for hearing this week in House Energy Committee. And they amend that Clean and Renewable Energy and Energy Reduction Act that went through. Now, MAC remained opposed to that as it was going through the process because it really stripped local units of government of local control of the siting of these large scale wind and solar facilities. So these bills repealed the majority of that statute. So all of that Michigan Public Service Commission authority to site these large scale wind and solar, the standards that have to be written so that CREO, that compatible renewable energy ordinance language, and it really gets rid of all of that. And we can say that, and that would be great if we went back to more local control, so the locals had more of a say in what was going into their own communities. But I highly doubt this is going to go anywhere in the Senate. It might, it may end up opening up the act for some of the fixes that are needed. But I don't think it's going to be really high up on their priority list. So even if the House does get it out of the chamber, which I actually expect them to, I'm not sure how much movement we're going to have in the Senate.
Yeah, especially since all those senators that are pretty much in the Senate that voted for it the first time are still there. So what's going to change their mind to vote on something different now, unless maybe we get a scaled back version or something like that that can, margins are still tight over there as far as the Dem majority. So maybe they can get a few people to vote for it and you can scoot it through. But definitely, I think you're right from the standpoint of the broadness of the stroke they've taken in these bills make it very difficult to get passed in the Senate. I would agree.
The funny thing is that we just keep talking about these. There's only one thing that we've talked about so far that I think they're going to be able to come to an agreement on, and that's that Public Safety and Violence Prevention Fund. Now, hopefully, then, sorry, going to steal your thunder, Steve, but the revenue sharing trust fund bills were also introduced this week. Representative O'Neill and Representative Tisdale are at it again, fighting the good fight for us. To 4311 and 4312 were introduced earlier this week. And that's, our number one priority, getting that revenue sharing trust fund enacted.
Well, and we got to pass that at the House last time, 106-4 broad bipartisan support. So, and we actually heard, people were talking about it during the Public Safety Trust Fund testimony. Numerous people were from the standpoint of senators talking about, hey, what happens to revenue sharing if we appropriate these funds, to the bill sponsors of the House package saying, hey, we want to make sure revenue sharing is maintained. And we passed the revenue sharing trust fund in the past. So it's definitely on people's minds, I think, which is positive.
Yeah, it was actually in two committees last week. So it was part of the conversation, you're right, in Senate Appropriations on the road funding plan. And then we brought it up, and even, we've had other county allies. I think the Sheriff's Association talked about the need for the revenue sharing trust fund as well when they were talking about public safety. We had members on the House committee that brought up the revenue sharing trust fund too. So, I know there's momentum on the public safety, but that revenue sharing trust fund provides so much more flexibility and security for all local governments, that I really hope they start moving that along.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's to be determined at this point, and it's something we'll continue to watch and keep updating on. It looks like we have a lot of session days scheduled, so a lot of committees scheduled this week, at least on the House side, not so much on the Senate side. We'll see if that changes here in the next couple of days, but definitely keeping folks busy, and especially when you look at trying to have a July 1st budget done. We'll see on that. TBD.
I'm not going to hold my breath. I'm just
I
not.
wouldn't either. Anything else you want to update on before we sign off?
No, I think that's about it for this week. I'm sure we'll have plenty more next week after
4-week
what
committees.
happens in Lansing this week. Yep.
All right. Well, thanks for the update, Deena. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Podcast 83.